In this video, we're going to start off with a program that we know has got a problem, and we'll run the program, see what the problem is, and then try to use a debugging session to find and remedy the problem. So we're going to start off with the X Factor program, and before doing anything else, we'll just run it to see what happens. So as we had in the lecture example, and now we're expecting, of course, to be prompted for the next contestant, but we're not. We're asked for the act of this contestant. So if we put in something like pianist and then maybe juggler, we can see that we're just getting asked over and over and over again what the act is for Graham. Now this is not what is necessary, so we're going to stop the execution, and there's obviously some problem with the while loop. So on line 16 we'll introduce a line breakpoint, and then using Control F5 we'll start the debugging session and see what happens. So we've prompted for the name and we've now hit the breakpoint, so we'll use F8 to step over, and that outputs the message. F8 again to step over next line, which then asks for an input here. So we'll type drummer, hit enter. We can see that the debugging has reached line 18, so we'll step over that to create a new contestant called C. We can see that C has been created in the variable list. I've previously set up a watch on contestants, and we can see that its size is 0. So we use the name and the act to set the value of C, and then add C to the contestant. Size has changed to 1. And then we're expecting to come back up here, and the question is name not equals to the dot. So we'll go back into the loop. Now we know we're going to go back into the loop because name equals Graham. And of course the astute amongst you have already spotted that this is the problem. We haven't input a new name. And therefore, because the name isn't going to change, we'll always stay inside that loop. And just to illustrate what's going on here, there's the other message, pianist, enter, F8 to step over, F8, F8, and now when we add, we can see that the contestant size is 2. And if we take a look at the contestant's content, we can see that, oh, well, we've got 2 contestants. We expected to see Graham on both of them with drummer for the first act and pianist for the second. But we've got another problem, a null in each of these. So not only have we identified a problem and think we know the solution here, but we've now got a second problem. So I'm going to stop the debugging session and I'm going to remedy the problem that we've identified first, which is we're not asking for the name inside the loop. So I'll copy this, paste it in there. We don't want to declare name a second time, so we'll remove the declaration, and that now allows us to iterate correctly. So if I restart the debugging session, Control F5 to start from scratch, we'll put in Graham, F8, F8, now we type drummer, F8, set and set, ask for the new name, so we can see that this is working correctly now. Come up to here, the name is not Graham any longer. Jan can be a pianist today. F8, and we just keep going. Now the thing I want to point out again is that contestants is 2. They still have a name and an act that is null, so we've got to solve that problem. Just coming back to here, we'll enter the next value, which is going to be dot, which should now bring us out of the loop, which it does, and then we can do the output. Now I'm just going to hit F5, which will run the debugging session to conclusion. So what we need to do now is to solve the problem of not updating the name and the act of the contestant objects. So we've solved the problem here. I'm going to remove the debugging breakpoint and come into contestant, And there's obviously some kind of problem with setting the name and setting the act. So I'm going to set a method breakpoint. Again, with this very simple problem, you can probably see what the cause of it is. But for now, we'll assume that this is slightly beyond us, and therefore we'll run the debugging session again, Control F5, and see what it shows us. Now, we're just about to create the new contestant. That's been done. Now set name is called. And so the breakpoint kicks in, and we're pausing at this point here. So we're going to take a look at the variables. We have this, which of course is the current object, the current contestant object with a name and an act. We expect those to be null at this point because we've done no update. And then we also have the parameter, the name, which has got the correct value. So the value is being passed correctly from the main method to this setName method. So there isn't a problem with the parameter. So when we hit F8 to step over the assignment on line 11, we would expect the private variable called name to change, but it's still null. And that's the puzzle. There's the problem. This is still null, where we expected it actually to take the value of Graham, which is the value held in the name. And that is probably the point at which we would realize that we've got an incorrect statement here. Name equals name, which is assigning the current value of null to the variable so that null is stored in here again. Whereas in fact, of course, what we want is the name containing the value Graham to be stored in name. So I'm going to stop the debugger and I'm going to change that line of code. And of course, we really need to do the same here because it's exactly the same problem. And we've got those two breakpoints still in place, so we can start Control F5 the debugging session again. So Graham as the name, drummer as the act, hit the breakpoint and pause. Now, just to show what happens here, there's the value of the parameter. Here's the value of the private variable that we want to change. So we're now, watch this space, when I hit F8, now the update is happening. And we will expect the same again when we come into the act. And there we are. So we've now solved the problem there. I'm going to hit F5 to continue execution without any more debugging, at least until we hit the next debugging breakpoint. So this time Jan, who is going to be a pianist, will step over, and this time F5 to continue. I'm going to hit dot. This time we get to see Graham is a drummer, Jan is a pianist on the output. We've now solved the problems, and using the debugger has helped us to solve this problem.